Now in Italy, during the Renaissance, there was no monarchy. There was no king or queen like there was in the Dark Ages. Mainly there were city-states, and they became independent. They ran their own way. They, found their own food, water source, things like that. The thing was, with the Renaissance, there were families that took over. Okay, and we're going to get to that in a second. Now, in Italy, there was three main cities, city-states that were huge. There was Milan, Venice, and Florence. Now, these guys, they expanded and they became very powerful. They became influential when it comes to the Renaissance. And because they, of their ability to expand, it was very crucial for their survival and their ability to spread influence throughout not only Italy, but the rest of the world. Now, taking a little step back, in the Crusade times, the Italian ports made a lot of money from the Crusades because you have to remember, a lot of these people came from Europe, all over Europe, um, England, France, things like that, and they came down to Italy to get on the boats and go to Jerusalem, across the Mediterranean. So a lot of these peasant people, knights, nobles, kings, they would stop off at these port cities and they would leave money, buying food, supplies, place to stay, things like that. So these ports became really rich, and the most richest people became the merchants. And because of that, the when the Renaissance came around, these three families became extremely, extremely powerful. They were the Visconti, the Forza, and forgive me if I pronounce this wrong, Medicini, Medici. I'm sorry. Yeah, I probably killed that name. All right, those three families became huge, and we'll be getting to those later on. So just keep those names in the back of your head. Now, there was a writer. His name was Niccolo Machiavelli, and he wrote this very, very um, amazing book called The Prince. Now, in the book, he talks about how somebody, let's say a noble, somebody with influence, how they could acquire and keep political power. Now, the old thought, the Greek and Roman, even in the Dark Age thought was morals should be active in a ruler. So, in other words, for a king or queen or somebody who's ruling somebody else, nobles, things like that, they need morals. And morals is basically the knowing what's right and wrong, you know, just and unjust type of thing. But Machiavelli says morals has little to do with politics. And then he goes on to say attitude towards power based on human nature is that we are self-centered. In other words, all we do as people is care about ourselves. And he says as a leader, in order to act, you have to act on behalf of the state. You can't take things personal. You can't take things like a vendetta. You are attacking somebody because they did something to you. No, you take it. You do your decisions based off what's best for your country. Now, one of the most influential thing that he said in the book is that the person in power, the prince, whomever it may be, should do good when possible, but on that same token, they should be able to do evil if necessary. And that's where the term comes, necessary evil, comes from. It's from his book, The Prince. I don't know if any of you guys have heard that saying, but that's where it comes from. So again, good when possible, and evil. The only time you should do evil is if it's necessary. Now, in the Renaissance time, the nobility made up about 2 to 3%. It wasn't that big. All right. Now remember, nobility is the top people, the rich of the rich, things like that. Um, they will go on to say that nobility, they are born, they're not made. Okay, so if you are somebody who was poor and you got money, things like that, they didn't see you as one of them. They saw you kind of like new money, that you weren't from in a sense nobility blood type of that old jargon stuff. You know, they also said nobility. They needed to have character, grace, and talent. And on top of that, they needed to be a warrior. They needed to have a classic education, and they had to be into art. Now, with that being said, think of it like this. Somebody who is physically fit, able to fight, is well-rounded education-wise. They can speak well, they know their math, science, things like that, and they have appreciation for art. And on top of that, they have a talent, whether it's making art, playing music, things like that, and character. I'm sure you guys know the seven pillars or you've heard about the seven pillars, um, but they have those characteristics. Now, those type of people are hard to find. And back then, they considered the nobility. If you were a nobility, you basically should have that. And on top of all that, the nobility felt they had to follow a code of ethics or code of conduct. In other words, they couldn't just do things like they did before and say, "Oh, well, I'm a noble, I'm a rich, my family has this and this and that." No, now they had to have a code of conduct. They couldn't just do what they wanted anytime they wanted. Those days are gone. Okay. Now, during the Renaissance, the peasants and the town people, they basically made up 85 to 90% of the population. Now, in the 1500s, the serfs or peasants, they were legally free. Now, if you remember what I told you from last semester, basically the peasants and serfs, yeah, they can get away from their noble master or king, and if they were gone for a certain amount of days plus one, um, they were technically free. But the thing is, they couldn't just say, "I'm going to have this land and I'm going to grow, corn and things like that." No, they couldn't do that. You know, um, that land belonged to some other king, and if they wanted to plant on that land, they had to swear allegiance to that king or noble. So basically, they would go from one person to another. Whereas now, during the 1500s, they were legally free. So that meant they can go around and farm in some land. Now for family. The marriages back then were arranged. Now, arranged marriages they actually still happen today. But the thing is, back then, the main purpose for them was to strengthen a business or family ties. So if two families were feuding, let's say like I'm sure you guys have heard the story of Romeo and Juliet. You know, um, two families are fighting and they want to stop fighting. What they would do is maybe have the son of one side and the daughter on the other side get married. Or if, let's say, a merchant of, let's say, flowers, just throwing it out there, um, had a daughter and another merchant of flowers, let's say, um, had a son, then they would try to get them together. And then when they get married, that those businesses would combine and become one giant business. And then when they had kids, they can, rearrange a marriage for their child to marry somebody else, and then that business would grow even more, and things like that, and so on and so forth. Okay. Now, with arranged marriages, usually there's a thing called a dowry. Now, this is money that the wife's family gave the husband once they were married. Okay. So the let's say there was a woman and she wasn't very appealing. She couldn't cook. She was, in a sense, kind of, I guess, lazy. The dowry would be really, really high because they know nobody, no guy at that time, especially, was going to want her. Now, if the woman was beautiful, she cooked, she could have kids, she could do a lot of things. Her dowry would basically be really, really low or nothing at all. In other words, you are lucky to marry this woman, and you're not getting jack nothing from her because you're getting this extraordinary woman. Okay. Now, I'm sure some guys are thinking, oh, I would have just married her and divorced her. No, that's not how it worked. You could not do that. You would have to surrender the money, or they would capture you, and yeah, then the family could basically take back the money. And so you'd be stuck with the marriage and you would lose all the money. Now, at this time, too, unlike now, the culture, or I should say like 50 years ago, the man controlled the money and they made the decision about the children's future. It wasn't the woman, it was the man's decision. So now we're at the end of the presentation. So here's your last question. Do you believe with Machiavelli that it's human nature for people to be self-centered? Why or why not? Then give two examples to justify your answer. Again, justify your answer. So if you can pull out something from personal experience, something you've seen, even from yourself, do you think it's human nature for people to be self-centered, to only care about themselves, put themselves first over others? So here's a writing prompt, and be sure, please use this writing prompt to help you out. Okay, so again, I believe Machiavelli is, what do you think, right or wrong? And then that people are self-centered because, and you give your explanation. Now, once you're finished with this, you are done with this video. I would like to remind you that in order to get full credit, this sentence has to be in complete sentence format. And again, the only way you could be wrong is if you don't answer it, you copy it from somebody else, or if your answer makes no sense and it's like completely left field. Okay. Um, but other than that, um, I'm sure you did a great job. Be sure you turn in this paper or the packet back into the black basket next to my door. Be sure your name's on it. I've already gotten some papers where there's names not on it. And just in case you don't do that, next to the basket, stapled against the wall, there is a manila folder with names, no names, let's say, on papers. So if one of those are yours, write your name on it, put it into the black basket so you can get your credit. Okay. Uh, but if you did all that stuff, good job. Hope to see you in class and see you later.